Hey, what's up, guys? It's happy Friday by the time I post this, even though I'm doing it on a Thursday, so I'm not going to trick myself there. Been ages since I talked to you guys. Apologies about that. Been really focused on my writing, really focused on traveling and working with clients, a number of other things. But did want to kind of get back in the groove of things and talk about a post that I recently read because I think it's going to be super relevant to a whole bunch of people out there. Also, kind of like my commitment to you guys is I want to do at least a VCast every week, and I want to make sure that that VCast is under 10 minutes because I realize these things are going long. So today we're going to dive in and we're going to get really efficient really quickly about stuff. The topic of the conversation today is about productivity and efficiency in the workplace. So your favorite and mine, we all talk about this a lot. It's a struggle for many people, and sometimes technology is supposed to really help us with this stuff. And it does. It can be great, and there's a lot of great tools out there to kind of like make our days more efficient, keep us on track with what we need to do, communicate, collaborate on stuff that we're working on, and sometimes it can be a hindrance. And so I'm going to talk about a post that I wrote a couple weeks ago called How to Survive Being Candy Crushed at Work, which you can find on madmork.com/blog, and tell you a little bit about it and kind of give you some pointers on how to avoid getting candy crushed at work. So why do I use the term Candy Crushed? Well, any of you guys who has a phone has probably played Candy Crush at some point or another. It's a really, really compelling, very fun, very addictive mobile game. And part of the reason why it is so addictive is because essentially, you're matching these candies all the time. And, when you match three of a kind, going vertical or horizontal, they kind of explode and they eliminate, and then of course if you're matching more than three of a kind, it's like 4 or 5 of a kind, you create like these power-ups that help you kind of clear the board more quickly and have special powers which help you clear the board easily and get to the next level. And so for those of you who don't know, the reason sometimes that you might be like stuck addicted on your phone or addicted to mobile games like Candy Crush or Clash of Clans or Age of War or any of these other games, or Pokemon for that matter, is the whole element of rewards, right? And rewards is triggered by something in our system called dopamine. And dopamine, not to get like too medical or scientific or anything, dopamine's a neurotransmitter, which essentially, among other things, does a lot of different things. It's a chemical that's released in the brain, and among other things, one of the things it does is it controls the reward center in our brains, right? So when we do something that gives us, a small burst of pleasure or joy, dopamine is released into our system, and it kind of makes us feel good. Whenever you get that achievement, you clear a level, or you get like, those 4 of a kind that match, and you get these exploding candies across the screen, and it looks really cool. The feeling of joy or pleasure that you're getting, that's from dopamine, right? And why I'm bringing mobile games up and dopamine up is because a lot of the ways that we work today in our offices, a lot of the focus I see among younger generation of employees at times is based on accomplishing tasks that have the same effect as video games, in the sense that they release dopamine when we do them, right? So let me give you an example. Some of you guys out there probably use like Trello or Asana, or you have a to-do list using like Google Keep, or checking off task lists in Outlook or whatever it may be. Probably what you'll realize is kind of like you derive a certain kind of perverse fascination from completing some of these tasks, from checking them off, right? It feels good when you check off a task on your task list. You feel kind of a sense of gratification and accomplishment when you do that, right? Particularly if you have a really long task list, which most of us have really long task lists. You'll feel good doing that, right? But here's one of the challenges, right? The challenges is that in the environment that we work in today, oftentimes your to-do list gets longer and longer and longer, right? Your manager gives you something to do. A colleague that you work right next to gives you something to do. Somebody in another department asks you to do something for them. The product team asks you to revise, some text that they're preparing for a landing page or an email campaign. Somebody else asks you if you would, do their 360 review as part of their peer review. And the next thing you know, you've got a to-do list that's getting longer and longer and longer, right? And the challenge there is that, as your to-do list gets longer, A, you feel overwhelmed. You feel stressed out. Sometimes you lose the notion of priorities. Okay, like I got these 50 things to do, which one's most important? And that could really stress you out, and it can cause you to lose focus on the things that you really have to do, right? The things that are most important. So to-do lists are great in terms of keeping us organized, but they can also be problematic if we let them endlessly expand and if we're always saying yes to people in terms of doing things for them. Or if we're not prioritizing the things that we really need to get done, either for ourselves or for our manager or the organization that we work. So what's my tip on to-do lists? Well, a couple of tips. First of all, learn to say no, right? Just say no, like the old kind of like drug campaigns, right? It sounds easy. It's hard to do in practice. Some people have personalities that they're really kind of like keen to please and help others, and they generally want to help, and they generally want to do things for you. But you have to learn at some point to say no to people and really think about like what your priorities are, right? Which brings me to the second point. The other way to kind of like cut back on your to-do list and stay focused on what matters is when you have those one-on-one meetings with your manager, review your to-do list with your manager. Like show it to him and say, hey, here's all the things I have going on. There's a lot. I've been asked by this team or this person to do this, this, and this. What do you think? And constantly review your priorities. And you'll find that kind of like when you take your manager through this, they get a better understanding and appreciation, hopefully, of all the stuff that you're doing, because there could be a ton of stuff, and maybe they're not aware of it, and they don't necessarily value as much because they don't realize all the stuff you have going on. But B, also, they're there to help you succeed, right? If you don't succeed, it makes it a lot harder for your manager to succeed. To the extent that you keep them in the loop and that they know what you're doing, they can help you kind of like stay the course and prioritize and focus on the things that really matter, right? So that would be my second thing is really talk to your manager and kind of like make sure you get the most out of those one-on-ones, right? A one-on-one shouldn't be just a status report of like, hey, here's the status on these 5 things that I'm working on. One-on-one should be more around like helping you not just share the things that you're doing, but ask questions, get information, get your manager to remove obstacles, get more resources if you need it, alert your manager to kind of like anywhere where you're getting stuck or any difficulties you might be having. And then, like I said, helping them kind of prioritize your work as well, right? So that's the first thing is like managing your to-do list and being effective about that, right? And it's difficult because we all have them, and we want to get as much of it done as possible, but you have to keep it reasonable and you have to continuously reprioritize it. Second one's a big one. And it was funny because I did some research on this and I realized that this problem's been around for ages, right? And most of us still struggle with this, and that's the simple problem around email. Email is still pervasive in most organizations. A ton of people still use email. It's really the principal mode of communication that most people use across the world. Every company uses it. Every person uses it. And when I did a quick search on Google, I had more than like 58 million results come up. 58 million on how to manage email more effectively. And actually one of the earliest articles on this is an article that dates back to 2006, and the feedback and the suggestions on that are just as valid in that article as they are today. And email is problematic because of course it's used for communication, but the reality is people are like on average checking email 36 times per hour, if you believe that. 36 times per hour, according to a blog post that I found on the Atlassian website. And so, the problem is not only are you checking email all the time, but, that same article mentioned that, on average, every time you check email, it takes you about 15, 16 minutes to then refocus on the task that you were doing before you check the email. So if you multiply the 16 minutes times the 36 times per hour, you'll realize that you're really not getting anything done during that hour if you're checking email all the time because you're constantly refocusing. So email is a really big problem, right? And we have to learn how to manage it more effectively. There's a bunch of tips online that you can find. Like I said, there's tons of articles specifically on this. A couple of things that I've seen that work for me is, first of all, set yourself at 1 or 2 times in the day where you check email. Don't check email all the time. Maybe what you do is you come in and you check email at 9 a.m. So you look at all the email that came in overnight. You then check email maybe around lunchtime because there's a bunch of people during the morning after morning meetings that have sent you something. And maybe you check email one last time at the end of the day around 5 before you leave, right? So everybody has different ways of working, and some people are more productive during certain times, and so they want to be doing certain kind of work at that time and not checking email. It's up to you, but I think one thing I strongly recommend is set yourself 2 or 3 times a day that you're checking email, right? What else? If email wasn't bad enough, we also have Slack, right? And Slack is challenging because, if email was intrusive, Slack is even more intrusive because although a lot of people use it, the problem with Slack is essentially that since it's a messaging platform, it requires almost kind of instantaneous reply, right? People will send you a Slack message and they'll expect you to get back to them ASAP. I would say, the challenge with Slack as well is kind of the same as email is if you know that you have to work like on something that requires deep thinking, like you need to write a blog post or you need to review some accounting records or you need to work on a business plan or whatever, right? You really need to be focused, control quit, right? Just turn it off would be one way. Put your phone that has your Slack notifications in a drawer and don't look at it for a while. Post a status update on Slack saying that, for the next 60 minutes you're going to be unavailable and that, if somebody really needs to talk to you, they need to come to your desk or something. So, Slack is again, it's one of these things where it's really tempting to check it all the time. It's really tempting to go into a channel and see what people are talking about. It's really tempting to reply to somebody who sends you a message. You get that kind of reward dopamine feel when somebody kind of like puts an emoticon and thanks you in the channel for having done something. But you have to control when and how you use it and not let it kind of like overburden your life, right? After Slack, the other big one obviously that wastes a ton of time is calendar, right? It's meetings and calendar. And the reality is kind of that same infographic I was talking about by Atlassian. Shows a couple of really interesting data points about calendar and meetings that are probably going to make you laugh out loud or cry depending on whether this is something that applies to you. But for example, the average employee attends 62 meetings a month. Can you believe that? 62 meetings a month, right? Think of how long the average meeting is. It's usually 30 minutes to an hour, right? The average employee wastes 31 hours per month in meetings, right? Which is a ton. 73% of employees do other work while they're in the meeting. I see this all the time. When I used to work for other companies and I would go to these big meetings, everybody always had their laptop out and everybody was always doing something else, right? So how focused are they on the content of the meeting or the action items that they need to take? That's a struggle, right? 45% of employees feel completely overwhelmed by meetings. And the more meetings we have, the more overwhelmed people feel. And last but not least, wasted time from meetings is costing us somewhere in the neighborhood of like $37 billion a year, according to these statistics. So how do you better manage that? Well, first of all, be much more disciplined about the meeting invites that you accept, right? Really ask the organizers, what's the agenda of this meeting? Who's attending? What do we need to get out of it? Does the meeting really need to be 60 minutes? Can we do it in 30? Keep meetings small. I found that the more people you have in a meeting, the less things get done because everybody wants to talk, everybody has an opinion, and things just drag out, right? Make sure that there are clear action items coming out of the meeting, like who's accountable for what. If there was an issue that was raised at this meeting, who's got to do what for the next meeting and by when does it need to get done, right? So make sure that clear action items come out of that meeting, people are accountable, people know when things need to get done, and people have a clear understanding of, what they're trying to do with these meetings, right? And then again, find meetings that you don't necessarily need to attend. There's always going to be meetings where somebody might think they need to invite you, so they invite you. So, if in doubt, just get on Slack. Not that I just said that you shouldn't use Slack. Get on Slack or send a person an email or go to their desk and say, hey, do I really need to be in this meeting? Is it absolutely key that I'm here? I got so much stuff going on. If you have a meeting summary somewhere or notes, can't you just send those to me, right? So, those are kind of like the 3 big bugbears I found. Kind of like, it's email, it's Slack, it's meetings, and of course it's 4 actually, and it's to-do lists, right? So really understanding and managing those things better, I think can save a ton of time in your day. Some other tidbits that I think, help a lot, at least they help me. One of the things that I do is I set up meetings for myself. So I know that if I really need to do something, like I really need to do this VCast today or this blog post, I'll block off an hour and a half in my calendar. People will see that as a meeting. They won't know that I'm meeting with myself. And I will spend the next hour and a half just working on what I need to do. So I essentially create meetings in my calendar for myself to force myself to do the things that I need to do. Another thing that I do, which I think helps a lot, is try and plan your day before it actually happens. I think, the worst thing people do sometimes is they get into the office around 9, then they spend around 30 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, making breakfast, talking to people over the water cooler, talking about how the weekend went or yesterday's game or whatever. And then they sit down and they start organizing their day, and before they know it, it's 10 a.m. and they've lost an hour, right? So what I try and do is kind of the night before, I plan out, okay, what are the 5 or 6 things I absolutely have to get done tomorrow? And then I think about my calendar, and I schedule my meetings, and I block off some time to meet with myself and do things, and I find that I'm much more effective that way. Another trick that I do is I send myself a text message of the 4 things that I need to do in the morning, and then in the evening, I send myself another text message of like, what did I get done today? And it's kind of like an accountability mechanism where by doing that, I force myself to really focus on 3 or 4 things that I have to get done that day, right? Like today I said I have to get a VCast done because I haven't done one in ages, right? So I block that time off in my calendar, decide how long it's going to happen, what I'm going to do. And last but not least, tech is awesome, but just turn it off. I know that sounds impossible for some people, and some people are like, turn it off? How do I do that? But it's true, right? It's I saw an article on Medium the other day, how disturbed we are by our phones, right? Just take your phone, put it on mute, or put it in a drawer, right? You're not going to die for an hour if you don't look at your phone. I imagine some people might, because if they don't see Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat, they go nuts. But really, if you really need to get something done, put your phone in a drawer or put it on mute, turn it over so you don't see the notifications, turn off the vibrating mode, or only have vibrating mode for like, calls or something. Turn off Slack and shut down unnecessary tabs on your browser. Like you'd be amazed when we'll work in an office space and I go around people's desks and you have like people working across like 3 different screens, and then every screen has like 10 tabs open. Multitasking doesn't generally work. If you actually do the research and Google it, you'll find a lot of articles that talk about the fact that the more we multitask, actually the less we get done, because we're not singularly focused on doing any one thing. Well, we're focused on doing 5 things, in a mediocre kind of way, right? So shut off a lot of those tabs and really keep the tabs open that you need to work on, right? The easiest way not to get interrupted by email, just shut off, close the email tab on your browser, right? Or shut down Outlook. Easiest way not to get disturbed by Slack, just turn it off for an hour. So that would be my last tip is, turn it off, right? So hope those help. Good to stay aware of those things. Good to realize that, whether it's task lists, email, notifications, meetings, etc., these things are all useful, but they all have their time and place. The more you organize yourself on planning your day, meeting with yourself, getting the most out of your one-on-ones with your manager, reprioritizing your task list, turning things off, the more you're going to get done, and ultimately the happier you're going to be. And with that, I hope that was super helpful. This is madmork signing off, and I hope to see you next week. Take care, guys. Bye.